that the price that the UK could import from for the US would be $4. And if the UK did not have a tariff, they would import that quantity of wheat from the US. If the US was not an available producer, and they were forced to import wheat from France, France's export supply curve would be up here. The price of wheat in France is $6. And if we had free trade, no US trade, but free trade between France and the UK would import that volume of, or that quantity of wheat from France. But remember, we assume that the UK has a $5 tariff. So the tariff is going to be applied against both French wheat as well as US wheat. So the tariff-ridden price will end up being $9, the $4 US price, plus the $5 tariff. So this is the export supply curve for the US plus the tariff. And notice that with the tariff in place, the UK imports only MT. Okay. So this is where we want to start our analysis and think, now, okay, we've got this situation. What happens if the UK now joins the Economic Union what happens if the UK now joins the Economic Union, these are imports, of which France is already a member? So notice that in that case, we'll move from a tariff-ridden price of $9 to a free trade price of $6. We'll import all our wheat from France and not from the US. So there are a couple things that we can look at here. So let me label a couple of areas, A, B, C. So what happens then is the price of wheat falls and the quantity of imported wheat increases. So we can come back to our changes in consumer surplus. So consumer surplus has increased by A and B. We're not worried about producer surplus here, but we want to think about what happens to government revenue. Remember, we were importing from the US and charging a $5 tariff. Now we're importing more from France, but we're importing it at a zero tariff rate, so there's no tariff revenue. So our tariff revenue goes down by A and C. And therefore, our net, we have a gain of B and a loss of C. Well, notice what B represents is coming about is because we have this increase in the quantity imported. So this C area is part of what we call trade creation. B, I'm sorry, did I say C? B, it's trade creation, right? It's giving us a measure of the additional trade that's taking place, the value of the additional trade that's taking place. So it's the increase in the quantity under the demand curve. But C represents trade that has been shifted from the United States, which is the low-cost producer, to France. So this is actually trade diversion. So we've increased the total volume of trade, but we're also shifting where the trade comes from. In this case, away from the United States and to France. So from England's perspective, we have both trade creation and trade diversion. Whether or not England is better off under this arrangement depends upon whether the trade creation is greater than or less than the trade diversion. Notice, I've lost all my tariff revenue. Why don't I just import it from the US? I'll be much better off, right? But because I've diverted trade from the US to France, I'm actually paying a higher price. So that trade diversion doesn't allow me to, by getting rid of my tariff, doesn't allow me to capture the full benefits of having no tariff revenue. So here's a couple of cases where we can think about a situation where trade diversion dominates. Okay, so this would be mostly trade diversion. So if we thought about our three areas, A, B, C, so our B triangle is our trade creation. Our C rectangle, that's a rectangle, is our trade diversion. So in this case, it appears that trade diversion is much greater than trade creation. We can see the same thing, or a similar thing, where trade creation dominates. In this particular case, here's A, B, C. So in this case, we have a situation where trade creation is substantially larger than the trade diversion. So what we want to ask ourselves then is, what are the circumstances under which trade creation or trade diversion would dominate? Is there anything general that we can say about that? And the answer, of course, is yes. And so we can say the following. Trade creation dominates if the trade bloc partner is already the low-cost producer, or nearly the low-cost producer. So if you come back to here, notice France is nearly the low-cost producer. They don't produce quite as efficiently or low cost as the US does, but pretty close. At least pretty close relative to what we have over here. So the more the country that you're entering into a free trade agreement with is one of the most efficient producers in the world, then you're much more likely to have trade creation rather than trade diversion. The second point may not be so obvious when there are more countries in the trade bloc. So why would that be true? Exactly. The more countries that you have in the trade bloc, the more likely it is that one of the lowest cost producers is going to be one of those members. So obviously, one easy way to think about it is expand the trade bloc to include all countries in the world. You, by definition, have the most efficient producer, and therefore you will have trade creation, which is, of course, why we like multilateral negotiations, because we've included all of those countries in the world. And then finally, it depends upon what the size of the tariffs are, especially the tariff on outside producers. So the bigger the tariffs, the more likely then that trade creation will take place than the case when tariffs are very low. So, and trade diversion, of course, is just the opposite. Okay, so what we're going to do next week, well, we only have one class next week, right? So what we're going to do on Tuesday and then the following Tuesday, we're still going to talk about the WTO, but we're going to talk about the WTO and some of the controversies that have come up in multinational trade or multilateral trade negotiations. Things like labor standards. Is the WTO really a world government? We'll talk about environmental standards and international trade. So that's kind of where we'll be going over the next couple of lectures. Have a good weekend and keep the axe.